Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Sharp Weekly. In this video, I'll be going over that how you can integrate core data with your SwiftUI application. This is a multi-part series. So in this particular video, we'll be looking at how to set up and how to fetch the data and display it on our SwiftUI view. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new Xcode project. Let's go ahead and select create new Xcode project. I'm going to select single view application and I'm going to call this blog app. One of the things that you should do is make sure that you are selecting use core data. And by doing this, you will see that Xcode will write a bunch of code for you, making it easier to integrate your application with core data. Let's just say next, and now we are going to simply select any location that you want to save your project. I'm just going to select the desktop. That's perfectly fine. Now you will see a couple of different things added to your project. So if I go and open up the app delegate, the first thing you will notice is that the persistent container. Now, persistent container is part of the core data framework, and this container, the name that we'll be using for this container will be the blog app, which is the same exact name for our application. So this is all the default code that is already written for us since we selected use core data option in our initial screens. And we also have a save context. So this is going to save the current context. Now, most probably we will not really be using the save context function, which is declared in the app delegate, but you can use this. All right. Okay, now let's go back to blog app Xcode data model. So this is the model file that is automatically created for you when we select that core data option. And these are the models that we are talking about. These are the core data models. So whenever we add a model or an entity, that will represent that this is a type of data we want to store in some sort of a persistent storage. In this case, it will be SQLite, because if we don't do any settings and configuration, then core data by default will use SQLite database, which is a relational database. So right now you can see over here, we really don't have any entities. It's completely blank. So let's go ahead and add an entity. And you can add an entity by pressing on the Add Entity button. And now you see that the entity has been added, which is right over here. The name of the entity is right now entity. So obviously make sure that the name is something else. We're creating a blog, and a blog can have posts and comments. We are not going to take a look at the comment section right now. We're only concerned about posting a blog post. So we'll create an entity called post. On the section over here on the right hand side, you will see attributes, and attributes are properties associated with that particular entity. So for every post that we will have these attributes, which currently there are none. So I'm going to go ahead and add an attribute title. And the type I'm going to select will be string. The other attribute that I'm going to select, and the order doesn't really matter, wherever they appear is fine. And this will be also string. And I'm going to get one more, and I will call this is published. And I will make this a Boolean. Now, if you open up the right-hand side and select any of these attributes, you can furthermore select different things associated with the attribute. So you can see the title over here. If I select the title, it says that it is optional. Now, I don't really want it to be optional, so I'm just going to remove that. If I do want a default value, which I don't, but if I do want a default string, I can press this and I can write a default string over here. Same thing with the body. Body is not really the post body will not be optional. All right. So let's go ahead and check it out. I'm going to make sure that we are looking at the correct one. Sometimes you'll see that it kind of moves around a lot. There we go. So we have body. I'm going to say it's not optional. And then we have is published, which is also not really optional, but in this case, we also wanted to make sure that we have a default value of yes. So if you don't insert is published, default value will always be true or yes. And that's pretty much it. Now, another thing that to note about this is when we select the post, so I'm selecting right over here the entity, the menu that appears on the right hand side is a little bit different. And what we are trying to look at is the class. So the class that will be created will be post. And code generation option is set to class definition. Now there are multiple options that you can set, manual or none, category or extension. So if you set it to class definition, this means that when you build your application, it is automatically going to, well, core data is automatically going to create a class called post, which will consist of body property, is published property, title property, and a bunch of other stuff related to the core data stuff. All right. So make sure that this is class definition is set. All right. And let's go ahead and build this. All right, great. So now what we want to do is we want to create a layer of extraction so that we can call anything related to the core data, but without calling it from our view. So our view is called content view, and we don't really want to call core data directly from our view. And the reason is that if you do that, then you're exposing your model objects that are saved in the database directly to the view and creating a very, very tight coupling between the view and the model. And the model can have other business logic also. I mean, in this case, we don't really have any business logic, but I can always create an extension to the automatically generated class called post, and I can write some business logic also if I want to. So instead of doing that, I'm going to go ahead and create a folder called managers. And inside that folder, I'm going to go ahead and create a separate file. Now, this manager will be responsible for performing different actions on the core data. So I'm just going to call it core data manager. There we go. And obviously, if our application will have a lot more different entities, and I might be able to create post data manager and then comment data manager and so on. But right now we only have post, so that's fine. I'm just going to call this core data manager. I will also import core data. There we go. Perfect. Now we do want to create an instance of core data manager, but we also want to create the one and only instance, meaning singleton. So what we can do is we can say static let shared instance, and this will create an instance of core data manager, and we will also have a dependency on manage object context. So the manage object context is basically representing the actual context of different objects and entities inside the core data. So this will be using ns manage object context.current, which by the way doesn't exist. We have to go ahead and create this current property. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new extension. I'll call it extensions. And in that extension, I'm just going to paste some code. So let's go create a new file. And I will call it Swift file is fine. I'll call it ns manage object. And it's not manage object, ns manage context plus extensions. And I'm going to go ahead and paste this. So you can see that we are just exposing a static property called current, which is going to go into the app delegate and going to say app delegate.persistent container.view context. So it's just going to return you the current context of core data, which will be of type ns manage object context. And without that, you can't really persist or talk to core data. So now I'm going to go over here and we will update this. So you can see I'm already have to make sure that Core Data Manager has a constructor or initializer that actually takes in the NS Manage object. So we can go ahead and create that, which is manage object, NS manage object context, self.moc equals to MOC. MOC over here will be the manage object context. I'm just going to declare it, NS manage object context. Perfect, right? Now, in order to get all the posts from our database, which will be SQLite by default, we need to create a function which will get all the posts. Keeping in mind that we don't really have any posts right now. We just created this application and we have not really inserted anything. Function get all posts, and this is going to return you an array of posts. Remember that we created the entity in our file right over here, post. And when you select that, you set class or code generation right over here. This resulted in automatically creating the post class, which we are using right here. So definitely it's not a good idea to open up this file and start implementing some changes, because next time the code generation is going to run, it is going to override everything. So if you do want to add some additional functions or something to the post file, most probably you should go ahead and extend the file or extend the class. Post, it will be post array. And now we can create a request. So I'm going to go ahead and create a request, which will be NS, which will be of type NS fetch request of type post, because we are trying to get all the posts, post.fetch request. And now we can go ahead and actually fetch it. So post equals to try self.manage object context.fetch, and we will simply pass in the request, which in this case is request. If, however, we do get some sort of an error, that error as NS error, and we can go ahead and print out the error itself. And finally, we can return post. Great. So this is our Core Data Manager, and the only function it has is get all posts. Now the question is, where should we call this? Should we just create an instance of Core Data Manager in our content view and call it? It's not a good idea to do that, because once again, we don't really want to get all the model objects and expose it to the view. So for this, I'm going to follow the MVVM design pattern, and I'm going to go ahead and create a folder called View Models. The View Models will have view models associated with each screen. So right now we want to list all the different posts. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this post list view model. Now this will have this file. I will create multiple different files. The first file I'm going to create will be a post view model. The post view model is representing every single post. In order to create a post view model, you need to pass in a post object. Now this is the model object that is coming from core data. And once we have the post object passed in successfully, we can expose properties like title and body and published, which will simply return the values that we are getting it from the post model. Now I can obviously call these properties anything I want, because it is a view model that we will be exposing it to the view, but I'm just keeping it the same. I guess the published property is called publish instead of is published, but I can do whatever I want. The other view model that I'm going to expose will be representing the entire screen for our post list. And I'm going to go ahead and call this post list view model. And this will have a collection or an array of post view models, which we have declared earlier. And it will also have a function called fetch all post. So let's go ahead and do that. Function, we will go ahead and say fetch all posts or populate post. We are going to use our core data manager dot shared dot get all post. Now, one thing to note about the core data manager dot shared dot get all post function is that it is going to return you an array of model post objects, not the view model, just the model. So we can go ahead and perform a map on every single post inside the array, and we are going to pass every single post to the post view model.init function. So basically, in other words, what we're saying is that go and iterate over all the array of posts, and for every single post model that you have, pass it to post view model and return me an instance of post view model, which we can go ahead and assign it to self.post. Now, if you assign it, that's perfectly fine, but the post list view model need to tell the view that, hey, I got all the models and I got everything, and now you can refresh yourself. So for that purpose, we're going to go ahead and use observable object, and I'm going to mark our post instance, which is an array, with publish property wrapper. This means that anytime we assign a value to a post instance, it is going to notify whoever is listening. And it is recommended that whenever you're doing that, make sure that you are calling it on the main thread. So we are going to put all of this code into or inside the dispatch async so that we know it is called on the main thread. Let's go ahead and build it. Okay, great. Okay, so this part is also done. Now, right now, if you run this, it's going to fetch all the different posts that you have inside SQLite database, and it's going to return it to you, but it's not going to return anything because, well, there's literally nothing in there. So the first question is, well, how do we insert? And before you do that, which we're going to cover next in the next lecture and the next videos, we have to first find out, well, where is the database anyways? So let's go to our app delegate. And inside the app delegate, you can see over here in our function, which is a property, persistent container, we have something called a store description. I'm just going to go ahead and say store description.url, and just going to go ahead and simply print it out. The store description.url basically tells us that on our device or on our simulator, what is the actual path of the database. So let's go ahead and run this, and this time try to run it on an actual simulator so that we can get the actual path. It's just going to be printed in a console once the simulator is running. So this will give us the opportunity that, okay, this is the path that we have. So let's go ahead and run it. And using that path, we can locate the database, that is the name of the database and everything. So here it is. You can see the path. So you can see that the path is in Azam Sharp library, developer, code simulator, devices, some long ID, and all of that stuff. So, and the name of the database is actually blogapp.sqlite, which is the same name of our application also. All right. So we need to go to this path and insert some data. And now you might be wondering, well, why can't we just use core data to insert the data? And you're perfectly right. I mean, we can always use core data to insert the data, and we will be using that. But I think you should also know basic SQL commands so that you can see if it is even running correctly or not, or even if you have to modify the data. So you're not looking into the code, the Swift code, you are actually using some sort of a tool or some command line tools to interact or add some dummy data. So now that we have the path, let's go to this path and see what we can witness, that what resides over there. All right, so now you can see that I'm already at the path where I can see the SQLite database. Here it is. So let's go ahead and connect to the blogapp.sqlite. I'm just going to call it SQLite 3, and then the name of the database, which is blogapp.sqlite. And now I am connected to the blogapp.sqlite database. Let's go ahead and check what kind of tables do we have. So I'm just going to call .tables, and it returned me many different tables. Do you see anything related to the post table? The name is changed, but it's right there. The name of the table is Z post, and basically every single table that core data is using starts with a Z. Okay, so let's go ahead and check out what's inside this table. So select all from Z post. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and type it out. Select all from Z post. It doesn't really have to be caps or something, but it's always a good practice that when you're writing SQL, make sure that the keywords are actually uppercase, and because it will add some clarity, but it's not mandatory. Now, if I run this, it returns me nothing. I mean, there's literally nothing in the actual table. If you go ahead and check out the schema of the table, so zpost, you can see that there are many different fields in the zpost table. There is a primary key, there is ENT, there is OPT. I'm not sure what ENT and OPT are. And then there is published, that is your field. Then there is zbody and ztitle. So let's go ahead and insert something in there. So I'm going to go ahead and say insert into, well, what's the name of the table? It is zpost. And I'm going to insert ztitle, that's the name of the column, and zbody. I'm not going to be worrying about the publish or is published, because by default it is always going to be yes. And now I'm going to go ahead and provide some values. Okay, let me do it again because I messed up. Here we go. And now I'm going to provide some values. So I'm just going to say hello core data. This is the actual value going in the title. And this is the body. So I'm just going to type body. There we go. Okay, now let's go ahead and run our select command again. And this time you can see that we get some information. All right. Okay, now one thing to note about the is published is it's not really added over here. And the reason it is not added is because we didn't really use core data to insert those records. So if we were using core data to insert those records using core data, using a managed object context, then the default value will be yes. But since we are not using it, you can see most of these things are actually blanked out. It's really not a good idea to do what I'm doing right now over here. I mean, I'm just kind of ignoring all of these other fields which might be used for versioning. But just to show you that you can do that, you can definitely do those kind of things. So let me go ahead and say delete everything basically from the post. All right, here we go. And I'm going to go ahead and insert it again, but this time I am going to provide a value for one of the fields that I know, which is Z is published, right? And it's the third one, so I'm going to go to the end and provide some value. And if you look over here for zpublish, you can see right here, zpublish is an integer, which is right here. So I have to send in 1 or 0. So let's go back over here. I'm going to send 1, which means that it is published. Now let's go ahead and say select all from zpost. And now I can see that 1, which is representing the zpost value. So we have the title, we have the body, and we have the published. Okay, so we have some data in our database. Let's go ahead and say Control D to quit. And now we have the data. Now we can go and try to see if we can publish the data, put the data, display the data into our SwiftUI view. All right, so we are back in Xcode. Let's go to the content view. And what we are going to do is we are going to start using the post list view model, the one that we created earlier on. So inside the content view, I'm going to go ahead and create a private property which will be a private var, and I will call it post list view model, and I'm going to go ahead and also initialize it by saying post list view model. And let's go ahead and mark this with observed object, because we are observing this object. Anytime the post property changes, we do want to get notified. Now let's go inside the body and call it onAppear. And inside the onAppear, we can perform some action. So we can do a self.postListViewModel.fetchAllPost, which is going to ask core data to give us all the posts. So you can see fetchAllPost is going to call core data manager.share.getAllPosts, get all the posts, and then assign it to self.post, which is declared right over here. And then since this is marked with published, we are going to get a notification in our view, and now our view can update. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this text, and I'm going to say post list view model dot post, and for the ID I'm going to use a title, which is wrong. You should not use title over here. So, and the reason you should not use title is that you want something that is completely unique, and title is definitely not completely unique. Later on in the future videos, I'll show you how you can update your model, your core data model, to accommodate some sort of a unique identifier. So title, I'm using it right now because we're just building a very simple thing, but eventually you'll see that we should remove that and we should use some sort of a post ID, which will be a unique identifier or something like that. All right, let's go ahead and run our application and see if it runs over here. If it doesn't run over here correctly, then we will simply go ahead and run it in an actual simulator. Okay, so over here it doesn't really look like it's working. I'm going to go ahead and remove that and try to run it on an actual simulator. And I think the reason maybe it was having trouble getting the actual path to the database. So let's go ahead and run it on the actual simulator, and there we go. You can actually see hello core data. So this is our only record that is in the database, right? Now if I had multiple records, then you should be able to see multiple records. But right now we don't really have multiple records. We only have one record, which we inserted using the insert SQL command. And when we run the app, you're able to see that we get all the stuff. Great, right? If you do like this video and want to support my channel, then check out my different courses on Udemy. This is a course, SwiftUI Declarative Interfaces for Any Apple Device. This is all about SwiftUI, and this is a 21+ hour course, and it's going to cover everything that you need to know about SwiftUI. Now, I have recently published another course which is called MVVM Design Pattern in SwiftUI. Now, this course is a 6-hour course, and it is about how you can use and implement MVVM design pattern with your SwiftUI applications. So this is a little bit more intermediate level course where I will talk about domain, and I will talk about the domain objects and logic, and I will also create a server using Node and Express.js and JavaScript and host it on Glitch server. So it's a lot of fun. So if you do want to learn more about SwiftUI, I think this will be your second course. Start with SwiftUI Declarative Interfaces for Any Apple Device, and then move on to MVVM Design Pattern in SwiftUI. All right, so thank you so much, and I really hope that you have enjoyed this video.